What's up, guys? Koma here, and today, different video. Not much of a Splitgate tutorial of any kind, but I do want to talk about the current state of Splitgate, because I'm probably going to assume what you're watching on the screen isn't Splitgate. It's probably Warframe that I recorded a little while ago, because that's what I've been mostly playing recently. So I wanted to talk about Splitgate because obviously there's has been some sort of falling off. Um, Now, whether or not this is the case of the game being buggy or the game just not picking up traction like it should, it is a big shame because I do like Splitgate. But the reason that I play games is usually because there is some sort of reason that I play it. For example, the reason that I played Splitgate 1 was to make maps and to let people play maps. But the problem is I feel like when it comes down to Splitgate 2, I have no incentive to do that. Sure, I can make custom maps, and if we host custom lobbies or something, those maps will be played, right? But my issue is currently um, because of the low player base and because of how everything is handled from ranked to the challenges, everything has been fumbled so far. First off, let me say that ranked should have been the quick play alleviation of how sweaty quick play can be. Um, for those who don't know how ranked works currently in Splitgate 2, ranked works in a way that if you play quick play, and there is some sort of loose skill-based matchmaking in some sense in quick play. It's kind of obvious considering the fact that I play at about an average level, and sometimes I play with people who are about the same average level as me, or maybe a little bit higher. But in the idea that I'm playing these games, it still is unbelievably sweaty when it comes down to my lobbies. Now, I'm not totally sure why that is, but I'm going to assume it's part of the MMR system, which the MMR stands for matchmaking rank. And essentially, let's say the higher your MMR, the more crazy your skill-based matchmaking is. But what ends up happening is when you play quick play lobbies and you increase your MMR and then hop into ranked, well, ranked takes that MMR into consideration. So what ends up happening is that if you play as a pro player in quick play and you're extremely good, and then you come over to ranked, that means you're going to be playing people of equal level. So essentially what happens is everyone starts at bronze. So even if you start at bronze and people are already placed in champion, if you're an extremely good player who can equal up to champions, you are going to be playing against champions. So even if you're in silver and you play at least on a diamond level, you're still going to be put into diamond lobbies. And this is a major issue for me because ranked was supposed to be the break of the sweatiness in quick play. That's kind of the way I saw it. Because I was tired of getting just in unbelievably sweaty lobbies just to be pretty much pub stomp. There were literally people who were just playing the game to pub stomp. And I get it. That is something they enjoy, right? But that is not something that should be enforced in these types of games. You look at games like Call of Duty, and pretty much every like casual lobby, so to speak, is literally a pump stop. Now, if no one doesn't understand the concept of pub stomping, right? Pub stomping is kind of a term that isn't used as much as it is nowadays. But pub stomping is just the act of going into like a public matchmaking playlist in like 4 stacks and just simply playing the game so hard and so well that you're literally actively kind of ruining the experience for other players. Like, whenever the tagging tactics event was around and I was just simply trying to play the game, albeit, just playing the event or just playing, trying to level something, there were literally people who would 4 stack just to pub stomp and literally just chalk shit the entire time. And that was the break that I wanted rank to be. I wanted rank to kind of flush out a lot of that pub stomping so I could go in, maybe have some fun time doing camos, but I can't even do that because ranked is so fundamentally flawed that I can't even enjoy the game on a casual level. The gunplay is great, the movement is great, the portals are great, the guns are great. The only problem I have is the fact that I can't enjoy the game to the utmost degree that I possibly could. Going over to all the different bugs, challenges are they've covered challenges on their weekly little I don't want to call it a blog. It's kind of like their little weekly video recap. And essentially, what they said is that they band aid fixed all the challenges. So if something didn't work, they put a band aid on it, which evidently means that they're still screwed, essentially. So they're going to take like 2 to 3 weeks to entirely rebuild the challenge system. Because what happened is during the beta, when stuff wasn't working, they were like, well, let's try our best to put a band aid fix on it to hopefully fix it for the time being and later come back to it. And evidently that came back to bite them in the ass. Um, there's a lot of stuff that isn't working, and most of it on the lab side of things I won't talk about because the lab has a lot more in the just engineering side of things that is a lot more complicated, I'm sure. um Considering I don't know how big the lab team is because I only know of two devs who actively communicate with us in terms of the lab, so that's all I can say on that front. But it's just kind of a mess. And the next thing I really want to talk about, because has been a pain point for not only me, but for a lot of other MVPs. So I used to be a Splitgate 1 MVP. You can go back and you can go watch some of my older Splitgate 1 videos whenever Splitgate 2 actually started, or sorry, Splitgate 1 actually stopped development. Now, I want to state this for the main reason so you guys can understand where I'm coming from when I, first started, all the Splitgate stuff. When I first started Splitgate 1 content, I did it for map creating. Eventually, I did join the Splitgate 1 MVP program. However, I joined it on literally the same week the game announced that it was stopping development. At that point in time, I believe it wasn't too long after Endo left, because there was something going on, in the company. We don't know that specifics there. So essentially, when Endo left, we then cycled through a bunch of different community members. I remember Green Skull, I remember Corey, I remember Rockjaw. I think there was literally someone else in there that I just don't remember. And you look at that and you're like, okay, well, they're just trying to find someone to fill that slot. But the problem is I believe when Corey was around, the entire MVP program was being moved. It was being reconstructed. And essentially what this inevitably meant that any of the old Splitgate 1 MVPs would not be Splitgate 2 MVPs. So if you go over into Discord and you click on someone like me, Code Phoenix, maybe Zach Max, who else is in there? Literally any of the other Splitgate 1 MVPs that aren't currently Splitgate 2 MVPs, and you'll notice it says former MVPs. By all means, we still have permissions from whenever we were an MVP, but essentially, none of our MVP status got transferred over. And whenever they did open the MVP access for Splitgate 2, I submitted my application as quickly as possible in hopes that I would be able to get into the MVP program. Now, keep in mind, I was one of the very lucky few who were invited to the very first closed alpha playtest of Splitgate 2. I still have VODs, I still have videos displaying everything that I've done content-wise on that alpha. But still to this day, after submitting that application, I have not gotten a reply. From the videos I've done, from the map creator videos I've done, whether that being gameplay or that being something I'm doing a map creator, I haven't got a single reply back. But there have been Splitgate 2 MVPs that have been, you know, appointed. I don't know names right off the top of my head, and granted, I have no hate against them, right? My problem against the MVP program is the idea that there should be more of us that got pulled into this MVP program. Because when we first started seeing MVPs being put into this MVP program without any knowledge to any of the old MVPs, that left a bad taste because that essentially said they looked at us and said, yeah, no, not right now, essentially. And I understand that from a point of when the game was in beta. I think it was like the the open alpha playtest weekend they did in what, February, somewhere around there, leading up to launch. I don't think there's been very many MVPs that have actually been pulled onto the program. Now, I do want to split this up into two categories. Let me clarify that an MVP does not mean that they are essentially they are getting paid for it. As an MVP, you don't get paid for playing the game, sponsor. You can sometimes get sponsors, but you're not primarily sponsored to play the game. You are simply a community member who is basically an icon for the community. So people who are getting paid for it are instead Splitgate partners. And essentially what happens is they are actively sponsored to play the game. Now, there have been multiple articles that have been going out, especially a LinkedIn post that basically detailed how the marketing for big streamers went for Splitgate 2. And I want to be clear that they're welcome to use as much money as they see fit on marketing. I don't care. It's their money. They do what they want. However, um, when you spend $4,000 on marketing in terms of just large creators, it really begs the question of why didn't you just sponsor people who actively play the game? Because at that point, you're also catching the audience that you also want to catch. It There's just so much wrong that what happened just in terms of not only the MVP program, but just the way that the game was marketed. Because, for example, during the very first closed alpha, whenever we started getting the Splitgate 2 companion apps and we started getting the comics, there was this marketing of all the character stories. And even to this day, people are still interested into those character stories. A great example of this is the Rhino story. Whenever we started getting the launch announcement date for Splitgate 2, they used a leftover trailer that was used for their original marketing, which, for context, they shifted away from the original marketing from the old school Rhinoc, or not Rhinoc, but from like the character faces, so you can see the character faces, and eventually they just shifted over to something that's bland. But when the Rhinoc trailer came out, I believe it's called the What Do You Fight For? Basically, it was all about Rhinoc and his grief and struggling, wanting to see his daughter again because he lost his daughter Daisy. And people were intrigued. People were interested. People wanted to understand, what he was going through. People, probably resonated with it. And it turns out this wasn't an announcement for story mode. This wasn't an announcement for any sort of like campaign or anything. It was a BR announcement, which granted, I do enjoy the BR, but people were intrigued in the idea of what kind of story would come out of a game like this. And I think the way they had Rhinoc set up as this character that is going through grief in such a way, wanting to see his daughter again, even if that meant dying and going through pain over and over and over and over just to inevitably not be able to see her again, was very intriguing. And the fact that they never continued that marketing was a huge ball drop, because even still to this day, you can go to people who do lore videos, like my lore videos, or you can go over to I believe it's Leafora. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. But essentially a lot of people over there are like, "Oh, I wish these comics were like, canon, and I wish they did more with them, and I wish that, we had more lore." But inevitably, in the grand scheme of things, that can't be the case because any lore that is made is, we have to wait for it. Maybe it'll be in a map, but going forward, there is no longer a lead writer in Splitgate 2 because that lead writer was laid off, and inevitably anyone else who was also on that team, that small group of people who got laid off. Now, let me start out by saying this: in the case of saying there's a layoff doesn't necessarily mean that it was something that the devs wanted to do. Obviously, no one wants to lay off another, one of their employees or whatever. Um, because the co-founders, Ian and Nick, decided that they weren't gonna take salaries or anything like that, until they somehow sort out everything, which is great. I think that's a great move. But at the same time, it's kind of a normal thing over here in the US, North America, whatever you want to call it, um, to essentially lay off workers periodically. I'm not saying, that's a practice that should be, still practiced and done in the whole nine yards. I don't want to see anyone laid off. That's one reason why I'm scared of even getting a job in the gaming industry, despite me wanting to pursue level design. I don't want to be sitting there working my ass off just to be laid off. That feels wrong, and I, generally don't want to do it. And the only other option that I've been thinking of is doing, graphic design. Even then, there's AI, of which is just even worse in that case. But in the grand scheme of things, we don't expect anything from the, story side of things. And I do think the entire marketing was. So to say that everything is a mess is somewhat of an understatement. I think for the time being, I'm probably going to be keeping an eye out for the new Destiny DLC and seeing if it's any good. I'm kind of tempted to dip my toes back into the world of Destiny, although I kind of told myself that there was a good probability I am going to sit out this year. And that might not be true, but we'll see what the rest of the week says. Um, until then, I will, talk to you guys later. Adios.